What's up everyone? Today I want to talk about one of the best sorceress builds for endgame in Path of Exile 2, and it's an Archmage Spark build. This build can take on everything. This build can take on the highest tier maps easily, bosses easily. Every single thing on the screen will just drop in seconds with one spell. You can see here, we can just line up all these sparks and everything melts. Everything on screen, everything off screen, and on bosses again, we can just layer these sparks and they just melt away. So let's talk about it. Lots of people are showing this build, and what they're doing is they're spending like 20, 30, 40 divine orbs and trading to get this absolutely broken gear, this absolutely best in slot gear to just go and destroy everything and then show the build. What I want to do today is show a really simple version, something that as soon as you finish the campaign and you jump into this, what do? How do you make this with no divine orbs, with no trading? How do you just get into this? What gear do you look for? I want to show what support gems you should be using when you only have 2 or 3 slots available. You don't have all 5 as soon as you end game. And I want to explain how the build works, the mechanics that make the build work the way it does. And then once we've done all that, I'll show a more final end game version that I'm running to clear tier 15 maps, to clear Citadel bosses. And I've probably traded about 3 divine orbs worth of gear in my version right now. So let's get into it, starting with an explanation of the build. Okay, so let's talk about how Archmage Spark works and all the mechanics of it that you kind of need to know if you're looking to play it. And I'm going to keep it as simple as possible. I'm going to make myself a bit smaller so I don't take up as much of the screen. And I'm also going to take off my one unique so you can see it as it will be when you first finish the campaign. And then I can show the unique later if you choose to use that. So first, let's talk Archmage. Archmage is a buff, a spirit buff ability. So you have your spirit down here, the yellow bar around your mana, and you reserve a part of your spirit to have a permanent buff active. The way Archmage works is non-channeled spells gain 8% of damage as extra lightning damage for each 100 max mana you have. That means the more mana we have, the more damage we deal. So the first big part of the build is getting as much mana as possible. Once we have all this mana, we can do even more things with it. We can take this node here, converts all energy shield to mana. So that mana pool just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that means we deal more and more damage. So that's the first thing. The first thing is pooling everything you can into having more mana. Once you have all this mana, we can do something else. We can do this here, mind over matter. All damage is taken from mana before life. That means that not only do we have this massive mana bar, we can then use that as our health pool. So when you get hit, your mana will start decreasing. So you're taking damage from your mana first. I've got 4,000 right now, which is pretty average, really. There's people with a lot more. So you're taking this 4,000 mana damage first, and then if you get to 0, that's not just the end, because then you have a health bar. I've then got like 1,100 health. So you kind of have this extra resource that they have to go through first. Okay, so mana, good. The more mana, the better. Now let's talk about Arcane Surge. So if we go into the Ascendancy tree, the first thing here, you have Arcane Surge. Now, Arcane Surge can be triggered in a few ways in the game, but if you have this node here in your Ascendancy tree, you always have Arcane Surge. That just means you always have Arcane Surge turned on. An Arcane Surge is 10% more cast speed, 20% more mana regen. That's okay, right? However, on Stormweaver, if we go down to the bottom again, we have Force of Will. 1% increased effect of Arcane Surge per 15 mana. And again, I've got 4,000 mana on a really basic build. I've not really juiced this build at all. So that means you're getting tons more cast speed, which is why you're seeing at the start, we're throwing out so many sparks. I don't have really good gear. I don't have loads of cast speed on my gear, but you're still throwing out loads and loads and loads of sparks. And you also have the mana regen to handle it because of this again. So yeah, hopefully that explains how it works. It's fairly straightforward once you know the mechanics behind it. So hopefully that little intro does help. So now let's talk about how to build it. I'm going to open up a build guide here. So I've made a full build guide for this. I'll link it down below. And what you can see here is I've got an early game version and then a final version. Like that's kind of what mine looks like right now. But let's talk first the early game. So when you first get to end game, you finish the campaign. Where do you start? What are we looking for? I've showed some basic gear, and I've got some gems that only go up to 3. The reason is because after countless hours, you might not even have had a gem drop that gives you 4 gem slots. You might not have 5 gem slots. So I've kept everything very limited to show where you start, and then a starting skill tree. So let's go through it. So on the gems, what I would be doing first, Spark. You want to get Spark, and you want to get, so Spark, if you don't know, it's just projectiles that go along the ground. They just around the ground and hit everything they hit. So what you want to get on that is Inspiration. They cost 40% less, which just is less mana. You're going to be using a lot of them. That helps you stay mana consistent. The reason we need to have a good amount of mana at all times is because our mana is also our health. So yeah, you don't want to run out of mana. Next, we go for Arcane Tempo, 25% more cast speed, more sparks, more damage. And then we go for Considered Casting, 15% less cast speed, but 40% more damage. Now that's kind of countered because we have the 25% increase, and because we also have Arcane Surge, we do have really high cast speed already, so we can afford that 15% less cast speed. So that's how I would start it. That's how I played from like tier 1 maps all the way to like tier 10 maps pretty much. Okay, next up, Orb of Storms. This drops an orb in front of you, you stand near it, and it will fire out little bolts to everything around you. Now, the damage itself is okay, but the reason we take this is for this. Strip Away. Exposure applied by supported skills have 30% increased effect, and then Lightning Exposure. Supported skills inflict lightning exposure for 8 seconds upon shocking an enemy. And then finally, Conduction. 100% more chance to shock. So basically what this is doing for us is it's shocking the enemies, and it's lightning exposing them. Now, what that means is when you have enemies that have resistances, it will lower those resistances, and with Strip Away, it will lower them more. So we're bringing those resistances down. It's really good if you like open a breach and 20 enemies spawn around you. Make sure you're standing in an Orb of Storms. If you're getting onto a boss or a resistant enemy, drop an Orb of Storms first. That's when I use it. If you're just clearing the map, you can just use Spark. But when you're getting into a big moment where you need to get lots of damage in, or you've got resistant enemies, Orb of Storms just makes it so much easier. After that, we have Arc. Now, I would say Arc is something you're going to use more in the early game because you don't have the damage that you have in the late game, because everything scales with your mana and everything scales with your cast speed, and the more you do, the better it is. When you get onto bosses, I found Arc to be better. When I have like a yellow enemy in front of me, I found in like tier 1 maps when I was badly geared, Arc helped more because it was you aim at the target and it hits them with an arc. So I like to take Arc in the early game. It's just a straight hit that chains to enemies nearby, but it does more if it's just, straight on the target. So with that, I took Lightning Penetration for penetrating lightning resistance, and then cannot inflict elemental ailments, but deals more damage. I just went with that. 90% of your time you're going to be using Spark. Every now and again, when you've just got a yellow chasing you, or you just need to single target something down, Arc does help. Also, if you're enjoying these explanations and you're finding this useful, do consider subscribing to the channel. I've been making a ton of Path of Exile content, so yeah, subscribing does help me out a ton. Okay, back to the guide. Conductivity. So this is our big debuff. You drop this on the ground and it's our big debuff. It applies a curse, and when they're cursed, they have lightning resistance. What you put in there is Hex Bloom. This spreads the curse to enemies when they fall. Then we have increased effects of the curse, and then finally we have Focused Curse. They erupt after a delay. I would say if you're playing Orb of Storms right, you're playing around this properly, you don't need conductivity so much. However, with how they work, I find conductivity works a lot better on bosses. So I would definitely take that as a boss, as a big monster destroyer. Next up, the main event, Archmage. This is how this whole build works. Archmage is our big passive spirit ability. Non-channeled spells cost more mana, but deal more damage per 100 mana you have. So you want to take that. And then I use in there Lightning Mastery, +1 level of all supported lightning skills. There's not really much you can do with this, and you're not at a point where you have tons and tons of spirit to freely fill this with support gems. So I just go with 1. And then finally, Flame Wall. You can use this to have an extra boost of damage. This is as your sparks go through the Flame Wall, they just deal more damage because they have the fire attached to them. So what I would do with this is just super simple. Use Fortress. That puts the circle of fire around you instead of in front of you. So essentially, as you open up to a fight, how I would be playing this is, say you're opening a breach. You're opening a breach, or you're going into a delirium, and you're about to be hit, or a ritual, and you're about to be hit by 30 monsters, 20 monsters. How I would start would be drop a Flame Wall, and that'll put a circle of fire around you. Drop an Orb of Storms, which puts an orb right on top of you. So you're stood inside a Flame Wall with an orb on top of you. As soon as the things start spawning, press Conductivity to drop that anywhere on any mob, and then just non-stop cast Spark. If you do that and you have the damage, every single thing will just be destroyed. That's the early game version of this build. Okay, now as we come to endgame, as you progress, what do you want to expand? Where do you want to expand your gem slots as you get the Jeweler's Orbs? So if you're brand new, you're not aware, if you go to materials, you have these lesser Jeweler's Orbs that give you a 3rd socket, And then you have these other ones that can give you a 4th socket. The things I would be socketing first would be Spark, and the first thing I would take there would be Acceleration. Supported skills have 40% more projectile speed. So this is good because if something is like off screen, oh, and I will just say, if you hover over Spark, you can see here it is a projectile ability, so it works. And if something's at the edge of the screen and we use a Spark, it will get there faster. So it will take them out before they take us out. On top of that, if everything's just running around us, having more sparks out, traveling faster, just deals more damage because we're just getting the damage out and clearing faster. The second thing I would get to 4 gems slots first would be Orb of Storms, and I would go for the Font of Mana. So this is the way this works is as you have this out, you get 40% increased mana regen to you and your allies. Now, mana regen is important because our mana is our health. So if we run out of mana, we're in a very bad position because they hit the mana first. So having good mana regen means you have less chance of being caught low mana. You don't want to like burn all your mana and then get hit and just wonder why you've been one-shot. So that's a really good one to have. They would be the things that I focus on 4-star in first. I'm at a point now where you can see I still only have like 2 or 3 gem slots, some with 4, and I've cleared tier 15 maps with this. I've cleared my first Citadel with this. It's absolutely breezing through everything. I'm having very, very little difficulty, and I've barely 4-starred anything, and I haven't 5-starred anything yet, which is why I wanted to make an early game version of this. I've seen some people, and they have like 100,000 DPS, and then you look at their gear, and you can see their gear is like 10 Divine Orbs for 1 item. So I wanted to show you realistically, what do you need to make this work? And this is where I feel I'm at a point where this really, really works. Okay, so now let's talk about gearing. You've just hit max level, you've just got to endgame, your gear probably sucks. Where do you go from here? What do you upgrade? What do you work on? So here is your priority list of things to get. Number 1, mana. Maximum mana. Getting your mana as high as possible is more health, basically, more damage, and more to cast. So that's your priority. Then I would go for mana regen, I would go for lightning damage or spell damage, and then I would go for energy shield. I'll explain why, because, you know, we turn our energy shield into mana. I'll explain the mechanic behind that. Okay, I'm going to use my gear roughly as an example of what to look for, but I have on the build guide, I have shown what you want to be looking for on each piece of gear early and end game, so hopefully that does help, but roughly, here's what you're looking for. So if you go over a piece of gear, let's use like the helmet for an example, or the other hands, on every single piece, you want a high roll on mana. So if you hold down Alt, or if you press like thumbstick on the controller, you want this roll here on mana. There's a tier 9 roll on mana, which gives us 120 mana. That's the priority on every piece I would be looking for. On top of that, you want energy shield, you want your resistances like fire, cold, lightning, things like that. And then you want mana regen, etc. So we've gone for that on pretty much every piece. Energy shield, you can get spirit on your chest piece, which is good for Archmage. Energy shield, resistances. Again, we've got a tier 8 roll of mana, intelligence, resistances. On the feet, you go for movement speed. And again, mana, a tier 10 roll on mana, again, priority, some intelligence. That's kind of the basics of what you're going for. On the rings, I'll be trying to fill up any more resistances you don't have. Get a good roll on mana. Again, a tier 12 roll on mana I've got there. Cast speed can roll on rings, which is really good. I've got 9%, which is terrible. Try and get some good cast speed. Again, on the other one, a tier 10 roll on mana, some more cast speed, things like that. You can get really good rings. Mine are terrible. I've shown really good ones in the build guide. And then on your weapon setup, I would be going for a wand and focus. I think you could probably use a wand and shield. I like a focus. The main things you want here, again, high roll on mana. I've got +4 levels to all lightning spell skills. This can go even higher. Things like that. On the focus, same thing again. Energy shield, high roll to mana, cast speed, and you can also get some spell damage rolls on here as well, with levels to spells, which is great if you can get it. There's a lot of progression to be made here, a ton of progression. So yeah, that's what I'd be looking for. I'll show the build guide as well. So again, here's like kind of what we'd be looking for. I've put kind of what you want to be rolling on each piece. But there's one thing I haven't really mentioned, and that is the amulet. So as soon as you hit endgame, start looking for an amulet with, energy shield, spell damage, cast speed, max mana, levels to lightning spells, things like that. They're all really good to roll on an amulet. However, there is one thing, one recommendation, if you do nothing else, one recommendation on your gear that I'd be looking for. The very first divine orb that you find, the first divine orb that drops in your game, I would go to the trade site and I would buy a unique amulet because it's really, it's a massive boost to this build. Try and find it from drops. Sure. Try and use, you can use like, you can go into your stash and you can use chance orbs to try and upgrade an item to a unique, and you can use that on amulets to try and find one that way. If you're, you know, you're playing like solo self-found, you don't want to trade, you can try and make one like that. You just get a normal amulet, use this, and it might turn into the unique amulet, or you can try and find it from drops, but try and find this amulet. This is like your priority upgrade, and I'll show you why. So first, it has mana regen. Great. It has plus 50 to max mana and 50% increased mana regen again. So it has really good mana and mana regen. But you see here at the bottom, gain 22% of max mana as extra energy shield. That is how this build goes from being a bit of a good build to a build that has it all. So I'm gonna quickly just move my, I'll just turn my camera off. I'll turn my camera off, and you can see in the bottom left, if I equip my this unique, look at this, I get an energy shield. So even though we take converts all energy shield to mana. We take this thing here, converts all energy shield to mana, which means we can't have an energy shield. It gets overwritten by this amulet, so we convert everything to mana, and then we get an energy shield that comes in after that on top. So we're kind of getting both. We're getting the extra mana, and we still have an energy shield. And you can see here, I've got like nearly 4,000 energy shield. So all these items that we're boosting our energy shield on. So you can see here, we've got like, I don't know, 462 energy shield. If I've got 3,690, if I take that off, you can see now we're down to 3,000. So our gear is giving us an energy shield, and we still have this massive amount of mana. So yeah, this is, I would say I found this build a little bit clunky until I got this, and then you have so much more survivability. Okay, now let's talk about the passive tree, and I'm going to show you kind of the path I would take. I've shown an early game version and a late game version in the build guide. I'm going to show you kind of the route I would take to do this. We're kind of going for mana regen, energy shield, and damage, lightning damage. So we start down here. We would go up for spell damage and intelligence, cast speed, mana regen, increased energy shield and intelligence. I'd get all three of these here. Energy shield, max mana, 5% increased max mana, which is massive, and then increased energy shield. I'd come along to this cluster here, energy shield, energy shield, energy shield, energy shield, 6% increased intelligence there as well. I would then go all the way up to the top, and I would come along left, and I would get this cluster here, energy shield, max energy shield and resistances. I would come along. You've now got 2 gem slots as well. Gems are massive, absolutely massive. You can see some really good gems. They do a lot of really good stuff, so definitely be going for gem slots. I'd come down, and I get this cluster here. 40% increased effective arcane surge. That gives us cast speed, and it gives us mana regen. Massive. And these give, 15%, 15%, 15, 10%. Then I get this thing here. All damage is taken from mana before life. That's a big part of this build, so get it early. Then I'd get this thing here. Faster start of energy shield recharge. And then once I've hit this cluster, I'd go back, and I'd come along here, and I'd go along the top, and I get this 25 int and 60% increased energy shield. I'd then come down into here, and this is a massive mana cluster. You've got increased max mana. You've got 3% spell damage per 100 max mana. Massive, because we have thousands of mana. And then I'd get this one here. 50% increased mana regen while moving, 25% reduced while stationary. While you're casting Spark, you're not stood still. You're kind of slow moving and casting. You're kind of like constantly moving in a direction while casting it. You're rarely stood still. So that's a really good one. And then finally here, converts energy shield to mana for that big mana boost. That's like the start priority. Then I would start looking for the extras. I'd go up here, and I get this lightning cluster up here. Increased lightning damage per turn intelligence is huge. There's lots of other good stuff here. You can get this as well. Increased shock duration and magnitude of shock. You can go down here and get this another gem slot. You can get these clusters as well. Chance for lightning to chain additional time. Increased lightning damage and increased attack and cast speed with lightning skills. Then I would come across to this side. I would go and get increased lightning exposure. Down to here, you've got 40% increased energy shield. I'd get that gem slot. I'd come across down to here, and I'd go up here and get increased elemental damage, 30% increased elemental damage, plus 5 to all resistances. And up to here, increased damage if you dealt a crit, increased crit chance. And then finally down to here for increased energy shield and 4% max mana. That is kind of everything I've got. I've shown a few more things I'm going to be going for, but that pretty much covers all the bases. That is, with this, I'm destroying everything at endgame with very little problems, and my gear kind of sucks. Compared to what I'm seeing some people with, my gear kind of sucks. So this is more than enough. Yeah, but that's pretty much everything. Like I say, I've probably spent 3 divine orbs. I think I bought the wand, I bought the amulet, and I bought the chest piece. That's it. Everything else I've just kind of either crafted or just found and upgraded myself. This build can go so far if you just drop a few more divines on trade. If you just farm more gear at endgame and get those upgrades, you can take this so much further. But this will be enough in the early game to do everything. So yeah, I hope this video has helped. I've kind of talked a lot more because I wanted to explain it. So hopefully you've liked this style of video. If you have, do consider subscribing to the channel, and liking the video helps me out a lot. Other than that, if you have any tips, if you have anything you would change, any advice, or any advice to people who are just looking to start this build, what you'd give to those, that would be really helpful. But that's it from me. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.